Okey-dokey. Right, well, let's get started. So, Paula, if you could just give us a few lines about yourself, just a little brief intro. Who is Paula Harmon?
Hi, I'm Paula Harmon. I live in North Dorset and I write books. And I know Sim through the literary festival that we ran last year, and keep on running this year if you're interested. It's online. And I've been writing books. I've been writing all my life, been publishing books for the last 5 or 6 years. And I'm here to talk about my new book, which is coming out in a couple of weeks, which is called Murder Saturnalia.
Right, and that's the third in a series that you've done, which
Yep.
I've actually got the books here, and
Yep, I've got them here. This is the new one. This is the new one, which is now backwards on there, but as these things are, and these are the first two in the series. So if you look on my website, you can see them. Okay.
Yep. Okie dokie. Okay, so for those that have read books 1 and 2, how is the third one different? What can we expect?
Okay, well, the first book was and largely the second book were set around this rather self-absorbed money-grabbing matriarch called Lucretia, who's in her 50s. The third book is more around her nephew Fabio, who's 21 and trying to avoid all responsibility in life. Lucretia's still in there and she's still trying to grab money, and she's certainly still self-absorbed, but the main thrust of it is around what happens to Fabio as he tries to avoid her and responsibility and fails.
Well, that probably answers the next question then, really, is who has the biggest sort of arc in this story or in the series as a whole, I suppose?
Well, the series as a whole, well, obviously Lucretia's in all three of them. She's still the most important thing in life to Lucretia after money is herself, and possibly sometimes money comes after herself. It's probably a bit difficult to work out for her, really, and if she can get a bit of love in there somewhere, or at least a little bit of flirtation, she's very happy. But in this particular book, I think it's about her nephew Fabio, who he's trying to avoid being married off, and gets the chance to go undercover in a small town, and thinks that that'll get him away from all the trouble and all the matchmaking, and he can just hide out basically in the tavern drinking beer and play music, and everything will be fine.
Sounds like a fantastic life, that does. So which character do you like writing the most? I suppose from any of the books in this series.
I think I have a kind of a wicked pleasure in writing Lucretia, because she's a bit of a monster. She's completely oblivious to the fact that everybody else thinks she's a monster, and so it's quite fun writing somebody who's really that self-absorbed and doesn't ever really think about the consequences of what she does, or if there are some, that it's actually her fault if it goes wrong. And originally the very first book was written as a bit of fun, which is why it's probably a little bit more lighthearted than the other two. And the idea was it was on the same sort of vein as those old detective stories where nobody really seems to care that daddy's dead, and all they're really worried about is who's got the key to the wine cellar. So it was that kind of thing. And Lucretia is a mother-in-law. Her daughter-in-law absolutely loathes her. And I wrote the book as a gift to my mother-in-law, who's absolutely lovely, but as a bit of a sort of an in-joke, and because she loves detective stories. But Lucretia's not based on her. Trissa is sort of based on her, but Lucretia's not.
Is Lucretia actually based on anybody? Other parts of her based on?
I have a horrible suspicion she might be based on some horrible part of myself that I don't want to acknowledge exists. No, not really. I think she's probably an amalgam of a lot of the sort of bullies that you meet in life as you go along. I think some of the others are more based on real people, but not completely. I don't think I ever base anybody completely on real people. They're just little elements of them. So who else am I really fond of? I'm quite fond of Petros, actually, even though he's not very significant in the second book. He's more significant in the third one. I just quite like, just quite intrigued by him, because he was born in another part of the Roman Empire and has come to Britain, It's come from the sunshine to the rain,
Mm.
and yet still likes it here. And I'm sort of intrigued by him.
So the history that goes into these books, and well, a lot of the books that you've written, how do you go about research and things like that? Is it a lot of Googling, a lot of visiting museums and
Yeah,
things like that?
well, a bit of everything really. I mean, the stories are based on a family, and I think people are people to a large extent.
Yeah.
Although obviously they live in a different kind of world from us. They live in a world where slavery is normal. You can't, and has been normal for hundreds of years and will be normal for several hundred years afterwards. So you can't sort of suddenly pretend that doesn't exist. But at the same time, it's really about the family and about the interaction between the various relations. In terms of the research, though, I do usually find out about the era that I'm writing in, anything significant that was going on. Googling, reading books. Mary Beard's really good. She'd probably strangle me if she read any of my books, but I did Latin at school, believe it or not that I can remember any of it now. And so I learned a little bit about Roman life through that. And I've got some books on the ancient Celts, because the characters in this book are all Britons. There's a few Romans every now and then, I think, in the first book, but there aren't any in the others. They're all Britons, and they're mostly making the most of the Roman Empire, but pretty much doing their own thing in the background. So there's a sort of a mingling of the Roman and the Celtic in there. And I just find all that fascinating, really.
Okay, you have just lost one of your post-it notes behind you there, by the way. So.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about my post-it notes later on. Yeah, and what that may not mean.
But yeah, the next question I think you've kind of touched on already is who do you have a soft spot for in this book? I guess
I have a soft spot for all of them. I think Adrienne, who is one of the potential wives that Fabio might have, she's very shy and doesn't really, she's very overprotected. And I sort of had a bit of a soft spot for her, and I really wanted her to sort of come out of her shell a little bit, and discover that, whether or not she really did fancy Fabio as much as she thought she did.
She thought she did. She's sort of telling herself to go along with it. So some of your characters, did you plan to have all of the characters in the series from sort of book 1, book 2, book 3?
No, not at all. Book 1 was originally going to be a standalone, which, as I say, is why it's a little bit more frivolous than the other ones. But I did want it to be around a family, so I had all these characters, and actually had a list of who was going to get killed off, because there were a lot more murders in the first one than there are in the subsequent ones. And Fabio was in the first book. The first one, he's visiting because Lucretia's got this grand money-making scheme, and she wants her family, her nephews and nieces, to see what she's got planned. And so he's visiting, and he's younger, he's 19 then, and he's trying to keep out of trouble as much as he can then as well. But when I wrote the second one, the first one's set in what's now South Wales, because that's where my mother-in-law lives. And when I wrote the second one, I thought I'd set it in Dorset, because it's where I live, because we've got Dorchester down the road, and it's sort of set in Roman Dorchester. I could go to the museum, I could sort of link in with all of that sort of thing. General idea was that I would be able to go and do talks and things in 2020, but of course we all know what happened with that. And so I brought Lucretia down, but left the rest of the family behind.
Yeah.
And Lucretia came to visit her mother's family down in Roman Dorchester. And the third one, I thought it would be quite good fun to set it in Blandford, even though Blandford hasn't got a Roman past that's particularly recorded. It's called Blandford Forum, but that's actually a medieval thing. Before that, it was called Blandford Cheapings, believe it or not. And so it's not called Blandford Forum because of a Roman link. But I thought, I know the town, I can visualize it, and I'll create this imaginary place where Blandford is, and bring Fabio there. And when I was doing the research, like you said, I found that particular winter, which was there was a lot going on in the Roman world, in Rome itself. They'd been trying to get rid of the emperor, who'd gone completely bonkers by this point. but it was also a really bad harvest that autumn and a really bad winter. So I sort of like built that in. And so I had this image of Blandford, and then I thought, right, it's going to be a really bad winter. So that's what it is, even though it's not really Blandford. So, you know, any historians out there, it's not supposed to be Blandford. It's just in my head, I can think, oh, right, that's where they're going. And, you know, I could sort of like picture where everybody was.
Yeah, and you were just talking about sort of like Roman Empire and things there. So if you were to go back to Roman times, what sort of occupation do you see for yourself? Where would you be?
Preferably well off, I think. I think your life is pretty horrible if it wasn't, to be brutally honest.
You'd be one of the Lucretias of the...
Maybe. I probably wouldn't. Well, the trouble with being very rich is that you're always at a risk of somebody sort of like being after your money or whatever. Maybe a merchant's wife or something like that. Maybe a merchant myself, who knows.
Do you find yourself looking at the local area different now that you've done all your research into things and perspective?
I think I've always done it to an extent. I think because I've always loved history when I was a child, and I've always looked out of the window and imagined what this road would have been like 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, when the roads were different, or wasn't a road or whatever. And I know when I was working on the second book, and I was coming back from the station in Salisbury towards Blandford, and coming down as the sun was setting, and there was somebody going past on a horse right by there. There are barrows just as you're coming down the hill. There are barrows, you know, Stone Age, Iron Age barrows on the side, and there was this horse person going past, sort of in silhouette. And I could sort of imagine that as sort of like Lucretia sitting there thinking, oh yeah, I've forgotten I quite like sitting on a horse, you know. And just, not that the barrows would have been contemporary to her, they would have been from before her time, but they'd obviously still have been there by the time she was around. And so yeah, sometimes, you know, especially at those sort of times when the sun's setting, it's easier to imagine, oh yeah, this is what it must have been like. So, but yeah, it is one of the things you have to think about, how long it took to get from A to B, you know, is obviously, even with Roman roads, still took some time. Horses can't gallop for hours on end, you know, so things take longer, and you sort of factor that in.
And so a lot of your books are sort of historical, got sort of historical things in them. You were just saying then that you're quite passionate about that sort of stuff anyway. But if you were to pick between the Victorian times or the Roman times, which do you prefer and why?
What, to live in or to write about?
Live in or to write about. I mean, the floor is yours.
To live in, I think, well, it's probably the same answer actually. I think I would prefer to be in a Victorian era, late Victorian, perhaps, purely because of what was available. There's a lot of, you know, cruelty and injustice and inequalities, obviously. I'd like to think I'd have been a suffragette and so on. But things were changing, and you know, your technology was improving. Ordinary people could go on the train all over the place, and I think and they were getting to meet people from other places rather than being stuck in the same village for generations like they had been. So I think that would be really interesting. And in terms of writing, I think I probably prefer writing about late 19th, 30th, 20th century. There's so much stuff that you can find out that's so interesting, and I suppose you do have a bit of a link to, more of a link to it. You can imagine it more easily without feeling like you're probably... The Roman era was quite a cruel one, and I'm not reflecting that in those books, not even going to pretend to. You know, the things that they would have found funny and acceptable would be completely unacceptable now, so I'm not going to necessarily put those in. I think Victorian people are a bit easier to understand.
Definitely. So yeah, you're just talking then about the Victorian times. So your book, Wrong Sort to Die, which is set in 1910, I believe, in London.
1910, yeah. Also probably backwards.
So that's actually sort of a spin-off of sorts from another series that you co-write with Liz Hedgecock. So what's next for the Wrong Sort? Have you got a sequel sort of in mind, or
yeah, I have, hence my board. I'm trying a different technique of plotting. Normally it involves a piece of paper and I just write down you know, where I want the story to go. So it's like a skeleton, you know, is this going to happen, then that's going to happen, and all the rest of it. And then I have other bits of paper with names on, and characters, and I'll jot down significant events. And I thought I'd try something very structured this time to see if it's not working so far. I've still, you know, still basically got a big piece of paper, but this is my plotting board, and that bit's things about the characters, main characters, that bit's main bits, things about the plot. I know it looks a bit random at the moment. That's because, like I said, the main plot's on a piece of paper. That's historical facts, and as you see, bits of 1911 are falling off because there's such a lot of it, and that's just random ideas. So, you know, I suddenly get, because this is where I do my office work as well. So if I'm sort of like sitting there, sometimes I think, oh, I'll write it down, just stick it on the wall, and forget about it, and get back to my work. Yeah, it's 1911 in the next one. So this is all in the lead up to the First World War, and the general idea behind it is that most people, ordinary people, are completely oblivious that there is war on the horizon, but the governments know, and they're planning for it. We know, I was surprised, you know, in 1911, I knew that they were starting to train boys to fight in 1910 in school, but you know, they were calling it something else, but basically they were training them and using guns. And in 1911 they were buying warships, and all the multicolored bits, those are the different European countries all winding up and starting to cause trouble with each other, and bits of North Africa as well. So that's the sort of background to it. And this Margaret is a doctor, which is obviously not a normal occupation for a woman in 1910-11, but obviously they were female doctors, and she's got somehow tangled up with somebody who's involved in looking into the espionage that's going on. So that's what it's about.
And I imagine, being a woman, she probably faces a lot of sort of issues as well with that.
Yeah, she does. The first book, she's working as a pathologist in a London hospital. In actual fact, in 1910, there wouldn't have been a woman doing that kind of senior role in a hospital. Most women were doctors. If they weren't in private practice, would have been in female hospital, children's hospitals. And it wasn't till the First World War actually started that there was a war that was a hospital completely run by women, doctors, nurses, administrators, and so on, with only a few male orderlies. And apparently one of the first soldiers who went there cried because he thought that he was going to die. He was obviously dying if they'd make him go to a hospital run by women. And then when they started to ship him out a couple of weeks later, he said, no, let me stay. I'm being looked after here better than I've ever been looked after all my life. So yeah, she's a little bit ahead of the game in reality, but you know, it just gave her an interesting job that she would have been quite capable of. Yeah, it would have been very frustrating at the time, to being a woman. Yeah.
So some of your books, like I was just saying, you co-written a series with Liz Hedgecock. How do you find that process? Have you got any tips on that? Do you prefer to write alone, or?
Probably, because you've got a bit more control, but I would say writing with somebody speeds you up. So I mean, I really enjoyed it when Liz approached me and said, do you want to write a book together? I thought it was really good, and we really enjoyed it, and I don't think you'd see the last of us doing it. Yeah. And obviously when you do it, you're writing yourself, it's just all your ideas and you can control it. On the other hand, it's a lot sometimes, you know, you write as well, Sim, somewhere in the middle you sometimes get a bit lost and wonder where on earth you're going, and you know, it's quite hard to push yourself sometimes over that lip. And the way Liz and I approached the whole idea was, we had two characters set in 1890. One of them is the older sister of Margaret in The Wrong Sort, and she was my character, and Liz had a character called Connie, and we said what we're going to do is going to write alternate chapters. So I would write a chapter from the point of view of Catherine, she'd write one from the point of view of Connie, and so on and so forth throughout the week. So I was writing a chapter, sending it to her, she'd write her chapter, send it to me, and so on. It was like tag, I suppose. Yeah. And so you keep the momentum going. We had a plot, we had a structure as to where we were going to go, what we were going to do in it, and we did that for 6 books. And it is, I mean, you know, it's hard work sometimes, sort of thinking, I've got to follow this with something that's going to be the same quality. and at the end then we edit it together. We sort of go through and see what we think needs to be changed or improved, but we've always been really pleased that people said they couldn't, if it didn't say there were two authors, they wouldn't have known.
Yeah.
And so that's always been really good, because we don't write exactly the same way, but we're obviously complementary. And we absolutely loved our characters. Margaret, as I say, she's just a teenager. She's quite a bit younger than Catherine, but she's a teenager in the first book, disinterested in school, and just wants to, have a frivolous life, and is frustrated because the family's not very well off, and so she's not going to get it. But seeing her older sister come out of a shell and actually do something, rather than all the things she's expected to do, makes her think, well, perhaps it's more interesting to actually do something rather than just be a frivolous girl. So that's where she was from, and I couldn't leave her behind, really. So and likewise, Liz has taken one of the characters from the books, somebody called Maisie Frobisher, and she's writing a series of books about her adventures, because she leaves London to go off around the world, and so she's written about her. So it's funny with characters, you can't let them go sometimes, they just follow you about. So I don't know, I really enjoyed it. We're still really, really good friends, and she supported me throughout this, the process all the way through. Working on your own is sometimes quite hard work, and you have to push yourself.
Nice to have that.
And you haven't got somebody to rein you in when your ideas are completely bonkers. You've got to then go back and think, oh, I'm gonna have to take all of that out, because it just doesn't make any sense at all. So it's quite hard work. Whereas with two of you, there's probably somebody going, hang on, slow down, you're going too fast. And the other book that I wrote with somebody, it was a collection of short stories, so it wasn't exactly the same principle. We had short stories, me and Val Patelli, we put them together in a collection, and obviously chose what order they went in, and so on and so forth. And that was really good fun. So
you were just saying then about characters not leaving you alone. So I've actually got a big pile of your books here. And I was wondering what was next, if you've got any sort of more collections or anthologies or anything that you've been part of, or if this is the end for the murder series, or if there's going to be any more.
Oh gosh. Well, as far as the Murder Britannica series is, it's certainly the end for the time being. It might be something I revisit in a bit, and it might be with not with Lucretia in the middle of them. So that's like a trilogy with Lucretia in the middle of them. And so if I continue it, I might pick some of the other characters and sort of like take them on their own journey. You may have had a hint as to who they might be as well. And as far as obviously the second book in The Wrong Sort to Die is sort of underway. And then I do have another book which I wrote a while ago, which I'm really fond of, not murder mystery at all, not a not historical, it's contemporary, although as I said, I've started writing, and I wrote it quite some time ago, so I need to bring it up to speed a little bit. And that is completely different. I'm not even sure what genre it comes under. You probably know. It's either paranormal or magic realism or something along those lines. It's set in a real world, but where something odd has happened to the main character, and she's trying to come to terms with a lot of things, including that, and she's trying to hide it and deal with it at the same time. So I'd like to get that tidied up and edited, because it is finished and it's fine, but there's bits that need improving on it, but I don't know whether I'll get that done this year.
I think sometimes when you've got a story that you've sort of been harboring so long, it is hard to put it out there or finish it or get it to a level where you think, I just need to leave this now, because it's been in your head so long.
Well, it's all finished. It's been read by a couple of people who really enjoyed it. It's just that there are bits that I think that needs improving, and that needs taking out, and that needs sort of sitting down, because it's quite long. And I am really fond of that. So but it hasn't got a title. It's got a really silly title at the moment. So not quite as silly as The Wrong Sort to Die did, but it still has a silly title. So
so clearly you're a very busy lady. How do you have all the time to fit in all these stories and everything else that you do?
Well, I don't know, really.
I was going to say, how do you keep on track? But I guess the board behind is kind of a...
I'm not sure when things fall off. Does that mean I should keep them or get rid of them? You see, I'm just not
Oh,
sure. So I work full time as well, but my house is a mess. So I suppose that possibly answers the question. Uh, I don't know. Obviously, at the moment, there's not a lot to compete, really, is there? So
and
that it does feel like I do spend a lot of my free time doing writing stuff, but I do have days off sometimes.
and with all the writing, do you ever have any characters? Have you ever had a Roman character end up in 1910 London or vice versa or anything like that? Because you've been just so.
No, not yet. That's
There's
that's
potential
interesting
for
thought. Well,
that.
I've sort of got been a story idea sort of churning around for a bit about a Victorian person nowadays becoming nowadays for various reasons, and vice versa. Not that's particularly original, but you know, a story based on that, and that's somewhere churning around in the background. But no, not a Roman. I thought, well, that's not entirely true. I think I did once. I did think what it was one of those. What would happen if I opened the door and 3 people came in from 3 completely different eras, and we were snowed in, and we all had to try and make sense of what was going on, a bit like ghosts, I suppose. You know, what things going on around you, and you were trying to explain the television to a Roman or whatever. But it hasn't got any kind of plot. It's just a general idea. I haven't done anything. Maybe I should. Maybe I should.
Maybe. I know
I do sometimes wonder what would a Roman make of our society. You know, what bits would they think, oh yeah, that's I really get that, and which bits would they think that's a really good idea, which bits would they think were completely appalling and ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, really, I'd love to go back in time and see it, preferably not live in it and possibly die of a disease or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I must admit, I do find a lot of my protagonists sort of like teenage girls, and although I can really visualize them, they all have their own different personalities. Sometimes when I'm writing, I do sort of slip into there's another character's voice coming through a bit, and I have to remind myself, no, she wouldn't say that. And yeah, so I just sort of wondered how you dealt with all those different characters sort of channeling through you, really. But
I think the hardest thing sometimes is not to use. Obviously, the Murder Britannica books are written in modern English, and they're not. I don't try and make them speak oldie worldy English, because on the principle that the language they'd have spoken, which had been a bit like Welsh, would have been to them the same as us speaking English now. So it would have been normal English. But you couldn't have them say, oh, you know, they couldn't have potatoes and aubergines and things, because those things didn't exist. Well, they did exist, but didn't exist in Britain. And likewise, with the Victorian and Edwardian stuff, you can't have somebody say, I'll give you a call, because that wouldn't have been a normal. They might have done it, but they'd have, you know, I'll call you on the telephone or something like, you know, they've said something more formal. So you have to think about that a little bit sometimes. When you are, yeah, it is a bit confusing. If you're trying to write 2 things from different eras at the same time, it's quite hard going. But yeah, no, I haven't mixed them up yet, but who knows?
So final question on this sort of series. Lucretia's my favorite character, as I've told you multiple times, just because of all the reasons that you explained earlier about her personality, and she's just I find her a bit cutthroat, and it's just quite funny to watch her be so outrageous. I just wondered, if she was to do a charitable act out of these 3, which one do you think and why? So sell all of her wigs and donate the money, volunteer at a homeless shelter, or switch places with a slave for the day.
Oh my goodness. I think she'd rather jump off a cliff than do any of them. I think she might donate her wigs, but
Yeah.
I suspect that wouldn't be as altruistic as it sounds, because she'd probably think they're a bit out of fashion now. I'll pass them on, and I'll get some up-to-date ones.
Brilliant. And then I've just got 10 quick fire random questions for you, just for a bit of fun. So if you're ready, I will go ahead with those. So unicorns or dragons?
Dragons.
Top hats or togas?
Well, it's middle of the winter, so toga is probably more warmer.
Paperback or ebook?
Oh, I wouldn't choose. I'd like both for different reasons. Yeah.
Librarian or publisher?
Publisher.
Notepad or laptop?
Laptop.
Pen or quill?
Well, judging by my handwriting, maybe a quill would do the trick.
I did think you'd go for quill on that one. Britannica or Dernivaria?
Dernivaria.
Mystery or romance?
Mystery.
Standalone or series?
Oh, I'm conflicted really. You get invested in your characters, like I said, so it's sometimes quite nice to do a series. But equally I've got standalone ideas. I don't know. I can't choose.
The final question, fact or fiction?
Fiction.
Well, thank you, Paula, and thank you for letting me interview. It's an honour. And yeah, if you could just let us know where we can find your books or find you online.
Yeah, if you look for me Amazon. I've got an Amazon author page on there under if you search for Paula Harmon with an O, and I'm on Goodreads, and I have a website which is paulaharmon, or one word.com.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Paula, and we will I'll post your links for everyone to go and find your book. Thank you so much.
Okay.